Long before Athens became a symbol of democracy and philosophy, it was just another small city among the rugged hills and dry plains of Greece. It was not destined for greatness. It was poor in farmland, hemmed in by rivals, and often torn apart by its own citizens. Yet somehow, across 2 turbulent centuries, Athens invented a new idea of politics, one where ordinary men could debate, decide, and hold their leaders accountable. It was not born from idealism alone. It came from crisis, experiment, and survival. Picture Greece around 800 BCE. The Mycenaean palaces have long since fallen. The so-called Dark Age has left scattered villages and warrior aristocrats. Power lies with local kings and clan chiefs. There are no great empires here, only fiercely independent polis, city-states, each with its own traditions. Among them is Athens, a modest settlement on the Attic Peninsula, living off olives, goats, and trade across the Aegean. Its people are bound by kinship, but divided by wealth. The seeds of change are there, but buried under inequality. By the 7th century BCE, Athens is restless. Powerful noble families, the Eupatrids, control land and law. Poor farmers fall into debt slavery, selling themselves or their children when crops fail. Feuds flare. Vendettas and clan justice keep the city unstable. Meanwhile, commerce grows. Small traders, artisans, and ship captains want a voice but lack power. Athens, like much of Greece, is searching for order. Change comes not from philosophy, but from necessity. The first figure to break the cycle is Draco, a lawgiver around 621 BCE. His code is harsh, death for many crimes. But it matters because it writes laws down for the first time. Justice moves, however, slightly from clan revenge to public record. Yet Draco's code is too severe and does not solve poverty. Unrest continues. Then, in 594 BCE, Athens turns to Solon. A poet and statesman with a reputation for wisdom, Solon is given extraordinary power to reform the state. He cancels many debts, frees those enslaved for debt, and forbids future debt slavery. He reorganizes citizens into classes based on wealth, opening some offices to the moderately rich while still reserving top roles for elites. He creates a council to prepare laws and an assembly where all free male citizens can speak. It is not yet democracy, but it is a leap. Power starts to shift from birth to wealth and from wealth toward the many. Solon's reforms calm Athens for a time, but do not end conflict. Aristocrats still feud, poor farmers still struggle. Into this vacuum steps Pisistratus, a shrewd aristocrat and war hero who seizes power as a tyrant around 546 BCE. Ancient tyranny is not always cruel dictatorship. Often it means a single ruler breaking oligarchic stranglehold. Pisistratus governs firmly but cleverly. He keeps Solon's laws, promotes festivals like the Panathenaea, builds temples, and supports trade. Under him, Athens prospers and ordinary farmers gain land and security. His sons succeed him but rule less wisely, and eventually the tyranny collapses in 510 BCE with help from Sparta. What follows is the turning point. Rival aristocrats vie for control. One, Cleisthenes, needs popular support to defeat his foes. In 508 BCE, he enacts reforms that change Athens forever. He breaks the old tribal system, reorganizing citizens into new units that mix rich and poor, city and countryside. He expands the Council of 500 to prepare business for the assembly, where all citizens can vote. He introduces ostracism, a vote to exile potential tyrants for 10 years. The result is a new balance, power spread wider than anywhere else in Greece, a system we now call democracy. But Athenian democracy is not born perfect or whole. It is male, citizen only, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners. It grows amid war and rivalry, tested by Persian invasions and later by empire. Yet the idea that ordinary men could decide state policy is revolutionary. It shapes Athens into a naval power and cultural beacon, home to drama, philosophy, and debate. This story matters because Athens' democracy did not spring fully formed from idealistic thinkers. It emerged from centuries of struggle, class conflict, tyranny, reform, and survival in a dangerous world. It was fragile, imperfect, and often betrayed its ideals, but it gave history its first sustained experiment in rule by the many. As we trace the rise of Athens, we will meet lawgivers and tyrants, poets and generals, citizens fighting for voice, and enemies that nearly destroyed the city. We will see how geography, economy, and war shaped a radical new politics. And we will watch an idea take root that still echoes whenever people demand a say in their own government. Athens was not destined for democracy. It built it, painfully and imperfectly. This is the story of how. To understand how Athens moved toward democracy, we must first step inside the world it was trying to escape. Early Athens, from the 8th to the early 6th century BCE, was a society ruled by wealth and birth. Land was everything. Families who owned the best fields in Attica, the region around Athens, dominated politics and justice. They were called the Eupatrids, the well-born, and they guarded power through tradition and kinship networks. Ordinary farmers lived hard, precarious lives. The rocky soil of Attica could grow olives and vines, but produced little grain. Poor harvests meant debt. To borrow, small farmers pledged their land and even their own freedom. A bad year could turn a free man into a hektemoroi, a sharecropper forced to give a sixth of his produce to a creditor, or into an outright slave for debt. Whole families could be sold abroad. Over time, more and more Athenians slipped into bondage. Resentment simmered. Justice offered little help. The law was not written. It lived in the memory of aristocratic judges. Clan vendettas settled many disputes. The poor saw courts as tools of the rich. Violence between families sometimes flared into open fighting. Athens had a form of kingship in its distant past, but by the 7th century BCE, the monarchy had faded into ceremonial office. Real power sat with the archons, yearly magistrates drawn from the noble class. The Areopagus, a council of ex-archons, guarded tradition and punished threats to aristocratic control. Yet Attica was changing. Trade across the Aegean was expanding. Pottery from Athens was reaching foreign markets. Merchants, ship captains, craftsmen, and small landholders were gaining wealth but no political voice. Meanwhile, population growth strained the land. New classes were emerging, but the constitution still favored ancient families. The gap between aspiration and power widened. Crisis became unavoidable. Debt slavery threatened to turn much of the population into a resentful underclass. Aristocratic feuds destabilized the city. At times, rival nobles seized power as short-lived tyrants. In this atmosphere, the Athenians looked for solutions that could preserve order without total collapse. The first experiment was Draco. Around 621 BCE, the city appointed him to write down its laws. For the first time, rules moved from memory and privilege to public record. Citizens could, in theory, know the standards they would be judged by. This was revolutionary. The law became a civic thing, not a private weapon of families. But Draco's code was infamous for severity. Theft, idleness, and many minor crimes were punishable by death. Later, Athenians joked that his laws were written in blood, not ink. While the code made justice more predictable, it did nothing to help the poor. Debt slavery continued. Land hunger remained. Draco's reform reduced some clan violence, but could not heal deeper wounds. By the early 6th century BCE, Athens was near breaking point. Aristocratic factions fought openly. Peasant anger threatened revolt. Some cities in Greece turned to outright tyrants, strongmen who seized power to break the deadlock. Athens risked the same fate. Instead, in 594 BCE, the Athenians made a gamble. They gave extraordinary powers to a single reformer, Solon, hoping he could stabilize the city without becoming a despot. Solon was a rare figure, an aristocrat by birth, but sympathetic to the broader population, known for wisdom and poetry. He approached reform with balance, trying to calm poor and rich alike. His most famous act was the Syzakteia, the shaking off of burdens. He cancelled many debts and freed those enslaved for debt. Future enslavement of citizens for unpaid loans was banned. Land that had been mortgaged with markers was cleared of those stones. For thousands of Athenians, this meant freedom and a chance to start over. But Solon did not redistribute land wholesale or attack wealth itself. He sought compromise, avoiding a full revolution that might have destroyed the economy. To give new groups some power, he reorganized society into 4 property classes. The richest, the Pentakosio could hold top offices. The next 2 classes could serve in other magistracies and cavalry. Even the poorest, the Thetes, gained the right to attend the ecclesia, the assembly, and vote on major issues, though they could not yet hold high office. Solon also created the Council of 400, which prepared business for the assembly and reformed courts so that ordinary citizens could appeal magistrates' judgments. Justice began shifting away from the aristocratic Areopagus toward a wider citizen body. For the first time in Athens, the idea took hold that laws belonged to the whole community. His reforms were sweeping but cautious. The rich disliked losing their debtors. The poor wanted more land and deeper equality. Solon himself seemed to know his changes were fragile. After finishing his work, he left Athens for 10 years, refusing to become tyrant or referee further. He hoped his constitution would hold. For a while, it did. Athens gained stability, trade flourished, and social pressure eased. But underlying tensions remained. Farmers still struggled. Rival noble clans still schemed. Solon's balance created a broader citizen body, but left enough inequality for ambitious men to exploit. Into this world stepped Pisistratus, a charismatic war hero from the hills. Around 561 BCE, he seized power as tyrant, lost it, and regained it twice. By 546 BCE, he ruled firmly but with surprising moderation. Pisistratus kept Solon's laws and institutions but dominated them behind the scenes. He used wealth and patronage to win support, gave land to poor farmers, and promoted Athenian identity through festivals like the Panathenaea and the worship of Athena herself. Under his rule, Athens prospered materially and culturally. He encouraged trade, built aqueducts and temples, and supported poets. Many ordinary Athenians accepted his rule as protection against aristocratic chaos. Yet tyranny always depended on the ruler's skill. Pisistratus's sons, Hippias and Hipparchus, lacked his balance. After Hipparchus was assassinated, Hippias grew paranoid and oppressive. Discontent rose. In 510 BCE, a coalition of exiled nobles and Spartan allies forced Hippias to flee. Tyranny ended, but the question returned. Who would rule now? This moment was critical. Athens could have slid back into narrow oligarchy or welcomed another strongman. Instead, a new kind of reform would follow, one that broke the power of old families and gave ordinary citizens a permanent stake in government. The man to lead it was Cleisthenes. But before Cleisthenes' democratic revolution, it's important to see what Athens had already built. Draco had given the city written law. Solon had freed the poor from debt slavery, opened courts and assemblies, and tied power to property rather than birth. Pisistratus had shown how a popular leader could use these institutions while keeping order and prosperity. Each step chipped away at the old aristocracy and taught Athenians that power could be shared or taken. By the end of the 6th century BCE, Athens was no longer just a clan-ruled settlement. It had a written legal code, a wider citizen body, and a tradition of reform. It was still unstable, but it was ready for a final, decisive transformation, the one that would create what we now call democracy. When the tyranny of Pisistratus' sons collapsed in 510 BCE, Athens entered one of the most uncertain but decisive moments in its history. The old aristocratic families, especially the powerful Alcmaeonid clan, tried to reclaim control. Ordinary citizens who had tasted some voice under Solon and stability under Pisistratus refused to return quietly to the past. The stage was set for a new experiment in power. Into this struggle stepped Cleisthenes, an Alcmaeonid noble but an unusually shrewd politician. He faced a rival, Isagoras, another aristocrat who wanted to restore tight oligarchy. Isagoras had an advantage: Spartan support. Sparta, then the dominant military power in Greece, had helped expel Hippias and wanted Athens under friendly, aristocratic rule. Cleisthenes knew he could not beat Isagoras by old elite methods. He needed the ordinary citizens. His solution was revolutionary. Instead of fighting as one noble against another, Cleisthenes turned to the demos, the people, and offered them real power in exchange for support. In 508 BCE, he proposed reforms that would break aristocratic networks and create a broader political community. Athenians, weary of noble feuds and Spartan meddling, embraced his plan. The first and most radical step was to redraw the political map of Attica. For centuries, power had rested in traditional tribes based on kinship and region. Rich families dominated their local areas and could mobilize their dependents. Cleisthenes shattered this structure. He divided Attica into demes, local districts, and grouped these demes into 10 new tribes deliberately mixed. Each tribe combined areas from the city, the coast, and the inland countryside. Old clan ties were diluted. Citizenship now meant belonging to a deme, not to a noble lineage. This broke the back of regional aristocratic power. Each new tribe would contribute 50 members to a council of 500. This council prepared business for the popular assembly, ecclesia, which remained open to all free male citizens. The assembly itself gained real legislative weight. It debated proposals, approved laws, and voted on war and peace. The council's rotation, members chosen annually, often by lot, spread experience and prevented entrenched control. Cleisthenes also introduced ostracism, a simple but powerful safety valve against tyranny. Once a year, citizens could vote to exile any man they feared might seize sole power. If a name received enough votes, that individual was banished for 10 years, losing office but not property or rights beyond exile. This gave the people a peaceful, legal way to remove dangerous figures before they became dictators. He reformed the Areopagus and archonships so that the old noble councils could no longer dominate without check. Ordinary citizens, even the poorer classes, gained access to some offices and the right to hold magistrates accountable. Juries drawn from the citizen body could review officials' conduct at the end of their terms. None of this instantly created a perfect democracy. Women, slaves, and resident foreigners, medics, were excluded. Wealth still mattered for some higher offices. But compared to the rest of Greece, it was astonishing. Power was now anchored in a broad male citizenry rather than a few families. Military service tied directly to this system. Hoplites and rowers who defended the city also debated its policies. Identity shifted from clan to polis. These reforms did not pass without resistance. Isagoras tried to overturn them by appealing to Sparta. King Cleomenes thus marched on Athens, attempting to install oligarchic rule. But the Athenian people, now politically awakened, rose in defense of their new order. The Spartan force was trapped on the Acropolis and forced to withdraw. In that moment, the Athenians, ordinary farmers, craftsmen, and sailors, had defended their own political system against a foreign king and local aristocrats. Democracy had taken root through collective action, not royal gift. The early democratic institutions were designed for balance and participation. The ecclesia met roughly 40 times a year, deciding on war, foreign alliances, and important laws. Any citizen could speak, a practice called isagoria, equality of speech. The Council of 500 set the agenda, handled day-to-day administration, and rotated its leadership monthly. Most positions, except for key generals, strategoi, were filled by lot, a deliberate attempt to break elite monopolies. Public pay for some offices was introduced later to allow poorer men to serve. This structure encouraged civic engagement on an unprecedented scale. Athenian men were not merely subjects, they were expected to attend, vote, judge, and sometimes hold office. Politics became a shared duty. Even those too poor to serve as hoplites could row in the navy and claim a voice in return. The link between military service and political rights, first forged under Solon and Pisistratus, deepened under Cleisthenes. The psychological shift was as important as the legal one. Athenians began to see themselves as a demos with collective power. No single clan, tyrant, or foreign king would decide their fate. This confidence would soon face extraordinary tests. Persia was rising in the east, already expanding into Asia Minor and eyeing the Aegean. The young democracy would be forced to fight for its survival almost immediately. Still, the Cleisthenic reforms gave Athens tools it had never possessed. A wide citizen base willing to defend its rights, flexible institutions capable of quick decision, and a culture that valued public debate. Over the next decades, these features would prove decisive. It's easy to idealize this early democracy, but it was born of necessity as much as vision. Cleisthenes was an aristocrat maneuvering for power, not a philosopher dreaming of equality. His rivals were brutal. Sparta's interference was real. Yet by seeking popular backing, he accidentally empowered a new political order that would outlive him. Democracy grew not from abstract love of liberty, but from practical struggle to break oligarchic deadlock. Athens after Cleisthenes was still fragile. The Persian threat loomed. Oligarchs remained resentful. The new institutions had never faced total war. But a foundation existed. For the first time in history, a major city-state functioned through broad citizen rule. And once people have tasted such power, they rarely forget. Within a generation, this democracy would be baptized by fire in the Persian Wars, proving its worth and cementing Athenian pride. The idea that ordinary men could debate and decide, fight and govern, would carry Athens into its golden age, and echo across centuries. Barely a generation after Cleisthenes' reforms, the new Athenian democracy faced a challenge that could have ended it before it matured. Far to the east, the Persian Empire under kings Darius and later Xerxes had built the largest, richest power the world had yet seen. Stretching from modern Turkey to India, Persia commanded vast armies and tribute. Greek cities on the western fringe of its empire, in Ionia along the coast of Asia Minor, were small and fractious by comparison. Yet these cities were culturally close to Athens and other mainland Greeks. When they rebelled against Persia around 499 BCE, Athens made a fateful decision. It sent help. This Ionian revolt was poorly coordinated and ultimately crushed by 494 BCE, but Athens' involvement enraged King Darius III. A rising, self-confident democracy had dared to strike the great king's empire. Darius vowed revenge and began preparing an invasion to punish Athens and its ally Eretria. For Athens, the threat was terrifying. Persia could field armies far larger than any Greek city and commanded a fleet that dwarfed local navies. Internally, Athens was still politically fragile. Its democracy was young. Aristocrats and ex-tyrants might welcome a Persian-backed restoration. Yet the city did not collapse into panic. Instead, the Athenian ecclesia mobilized. They called on their allies in the small defensive league of Greek states, though many were hesitant to face Persia. In 490 BCE, Persian forces under Datis and Artaphernes landed at Marathon, a plain northeast of Athens. The Athenians, led by the general Miltiades, faced perhaps 20,000 Persian troops with about 10,000 hoplites and a small contingent from Plataea. They were heavily outnumbered, but Greek hoplite warfare favored discipline and close combat, while Persians relied more on archers and cavalry. Miltiades persuaded the Athenians to risk battle rather than wait behind walls. The fight at Marathon became legendary. Athenians extended their line to match the Persian width, thinning the center but strengthening flanks. When the Persians attacked, the Athenian wings pushed back the lighter-armed invaders and then turned inward, enveloping the center. The Persian army broke and fled to its ships. Thousands were killed. The Athenians lost fewer than 200 men. It was a stunning victory for a city that had embraced citizen rule only a generation earlier. Marathon mattered far beyond tactics. It proved that a citizen army, men defending their own polis and voting on war in their own assembly, could defeat the most powerful empire on earth. It electrified Athens. Veterans returned with new confidence in democracy's worth. The city built a burial mound on the battlefield and celebrated the fallen as defenders of freedom. The message was clear. This experiment in self-government was not weak. It could stand against kings. Persia, however, was not finished. Darius died before he could return, but his son Xerxes II prepared a massive invasion. A decade after Marathon, news spread of Persian armies assembling bridges of ships across the Hellespont and carving canals through mountains to move fleets. By 480 BCE, Xerxes marched west with what ancient writers called 1,000,000 men, likely far fewer, but still the largest force Greece had ever seen. Athens again had to decide how to respond. Some Greeks urged submission, others looked to Sparta for leadership. The Athenian statesman Themistocles argued for a different strategy: fight Persia at sea. He had long urged Athens to build a navy, funded by the recent discovery of silver in the Laurian mines. The Ecclesia, after debate, approved constructing hundreds of triremes, sleek, fast warships rowed by ordinary citizens. For the first time, Athens' poor thetes, who could not afford hoplite armor, became militarily essential as rowers. Naval power and democracy intertwined. The Persian army swept into Greece, crushing resistance at Thermopylae, where King Leonidas and his Spartans made their doomed stand. Athens evacuated its population to nearby islands and the Peloponnesus, a wrenching decision made by democratic vote. Xerxes burned the empty city, destroying temples and homes. But Athens' fleet, united with other Greeks, prepared a trap. At Salamis in 480 BCE, Themistocles lured the vast Persian navy into narrow straits where its numbers became a liability. Agile Greek triremes rammed and boarded unwieldy Persian ships. The Persian fleet broke and fled. Xerxes, fearing supply troubles, retreated with much of his army. The next year at Plataea, a combined Greek force including Athens and Sparta crushed the remaining Persian land troops. The great invasion was over. These victories had enormous political meaning. Athens had been burned but not broken. Its citizens had debated strategy, chosen naval expansion, and then manned the very ships that saved Greece. Poorer Athenians, vital as rowers, gained new pride and leverage. The link between democracy and sea power was cemented. The navy gave voice to the masses. In the aftermath, Athens rebuilt swiftly. Under Pericles later in the century, it would use its fleet to dominate the Aegean, turning the defensive Delian League into an Athenian empire. Tribute from allies funded temples like the Parthenon and public pay that allowed ordinary citizens to serve in government. But that imperial future rested on the choices made during the Persian Wars: to resist, to build a navy, and to trust the collective decision of the people. The Persian threat also shaped Athenian identity. Democracy was now tied to freedom against tyranny, not just domestic, but foreign. Orators praised Athens as the defender of Greek liberty. Festivals and plays celebrated Marathon and Salamis. The city's confidence soared. Yet with confidence came ambition, and ambition would lead to both a golden age and new dangers. It's worth pausing on what made this possible. Cleisthenes had broken aristocratic dominance and created institutions where ordinary men could decide war and peace. That structure allowed Athens to mobilize quickly and invent a naval strategy suited to its resources. The silver mines funded ships, but the people provided will and labor. A more narrow oligarchy might have hesitated or failed to adapt. Instead, democratic debate, messy but inclusive, produced survival. Persia's invasions could have crushed a fragile new system. Instead, they tempered it. Out of fear and fire, Athenian democracy grew stronger. Citizens who had fought at Marathon, rowed at Salamis, and rebuilt their burned city believed deeply in their right to govern. This belief would fuel a cultural and political explosion unlike anything Greece had seen. But victory also carried seeds of hubris. Athens, now master of a great fleet and conscious of its heroic past, would soon dominate allies and rivals alike. The democracy that began as a shield against tyranny would become ruler of an empire, and face the tensions empire always brings. For now, though, Athens had survived its trial by empire. A young democracy had stared down the greatest monarchy of its age and lived. The stage was set for its golden age, and for the paradoxes that would come with power. When the Persian threat receded after 479 BCE, Athens emerged transformed. The city had not only survived invasion, but discovered new confidence in its people-powered system. The fleet built under Themistocles remained, the silver mines still flowed, and Athens found itself at the head of a new alliance, the Delian League, formed to keep Persia at bay. What began as a defensive coalition would, under Athenian leadership, turn into something far more ambitious: an empire. Out of this mix of wealth, security, and ambition came the period later called the Golden Age of Athens. The Delian League started simply. Member states, mostly islands and coastal cities, paid tribute in ships or money to a common treasury kept on the sacred island of Delos. Athens, with its strong navy, acted as leader and protector. But over time, the relationship shifted. Some allies wanted to leave or reduce contributions once Persia faded as a threat. Athens refused. It used its fleet to enforce membership, crushing rebellions like that of Naxos and Thasos. By mid-century, tribute was no longer voluntary. Athens collected and controlled it. In 454 BCE, the treasury itself was moved from Delos to the Acropolis, symbolically turning a league into an Athenian possession. This influx of wealth changed the city. Funds built and maintained the fleet, but also paid for grand public works. Ordinary citizens, once too poor to participate fully, began to receive mistos, small stipends for serving on juries or councils. This widened participation. A man could afford to leave his farm or workshop for civic duty. Democracy became not only an idea, but a daily material reality. The man most associated with this era was Pericles. Born into the aristocracy but committed to the democratic cause, Pericles dominated Athenian politics for decades without becoming a tyrant. He was elected general, strategos, repeatedly, and guided policy through eloquence in the assembly. Pericles strengthened democracy by expanding pay for office holders and encouraging broad participation. He also pursued a vision of Athens as the cultural and political leader of Greece. Under Pericles, Athens rebuilt magnificently from its Persian destruction. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, rose on the Acropolis with stunning Doric columns and sculptural friezes. Other temples, theaters, and public buildings turned the city into an architectural wonder. These projects employed thousands of artisans and laborers, giving work to citizens and showcasing Athenian wealth. To contemporaries, the Acropolis gleamed as a sign of collective pride. To resentful allies, it was a reminder of tribute spent in Athens. Culturally, the period was explosive. Drama flourished. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides staged tragedies that examined justice, war, and human frailty. Comedy, especially the biting satires of Aristophanes, mocked politicians and questioned imperial hubris. History as a critical discipline was born with Herodotus and later Thucydides. Philosophy began its ascent with thinkers such as Anaxagoras and Socrates' teachers. Sculpture reached new naturalism, and painters experimented with perspective. The city's intellectual climate was tied to democracy's openness. Ideas could be debated, challenged, and displayed in public. Athens also embraced its naval identity. The Piraeus, its harbor, thrived as a commercial hub. Trade brought grain from the Black Sea, timber from Macedonia, luxury goods from across the Mediterranean. The population grew diverse, with many medics, resident foreigners, contributing to commerce while excluded from citizenship. Slavery underpinned much of the economy, freeing citizens for politics and war. Democracy was radical for free males but rested on exclusion of women, slaves, and immigrants. Politically, the system matured but remained direct. The ecclesia often drew crowds of several thousand men to vote on war, treaties, building projects, and even questions of religion. The Council of 500 managed daily administration. Large popular juries judged cases and could challenge officials. Generals like Pericles were elected, but most posts rotated or were assigned by lot. No permanent bureaucracy existed. Governance was the people themselves. This experiment was not without friction. Wealthy elites still resented limits on their influence. Demagogues, persuasive popular speakers, could sway crowds with emotion rather than reason. The empire bred resentment. Allies felt more like subjects. Tribute funded splendor in Athens while others bore the cost. Some critics within Athens, like the conservative Thucydides, not the historian, opposed Pericles' dominance and the city's imperial drift. Still, for a time, the model worked. Athens enjoyed prosperity, relative stability, and unmatched cultural vitality. Citizens felt empowered. They had built the fleet that kept Persia away, voted to fund monuments, and sat in judgment over powerful men. Foreign observers marveled or envied a city where poor men could decide policy and see their city rise as a beacon of art and power. Pericles himself articulated the Athenian ideal in his famous funeral oration during the early Peloponnesian War. He praised a society where power rested not on a few, but on the many, where talent found place regardless of birth, where citizens balanced private life with public service. Athens, he claimed, was an education to Greece, showing how freedom and greatness could coexist. Yet beneath the glory, tensions grew. Empire and democracy sat uneasily together. Athens claimed to lead free allies, but enforced obedience with fleets and garrisons. Tribute supported citizens at home but bred anger abroad. Naval democracy gave power to the poor rowers, but also encouraged adventurous foreign policy to keep the fleet busy and funded. Conservative critics warned that radical democracy and imperial overreach could bring disaster. These tensions sharpened as Athens' rival, Sparta, grew wary. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a land-based alliance of oligarchic states. Cultural differences ran deep. Sparta was militaristic, austere, and ruled by a narrow elite. Athens was open, naval, and democratic. After decades of rising suspicion and small conflicts, their competition erupted into the Peloponnesian War in 431 BCE. The war would test Athens' system in ways Persia never had. Fighting a peer power, managing empire under strain, and keeping a fractious democracy united in long struggle proved harder than repelling an invader. Pericles himself died early in the conflict, leaving leadership to less stable figures. Populist demagogues rose. Strategy wavered. Yet at the start of this war, Athens stood at its zenith, wealthy, confident, culturally radiant, and convinced its people could shape destiny. The Golden Age was never golden for everyone. Women remained under strict limits, slaves had no rights, and imperial subjects paid for Athenian pride. But for the male citizen body, it was unprecedented. Farmers, craftsmen, and sailors ruled a great city and saw their collective will transform landscape and history. This phase also shows democracy's paradox. It can inspire art, innovation, and civic pride, yet also drive expansion and hubris. The same assemblies that funded the Parthenon would vote for imperial wars. The same citizens who loved freedom at home denied it abroad. Success bred confidence, and confidence slid toward overreach. Still, the Athens of Pericles left a permanent mark. Its architecture defined classical beauty. Its plays still speak to human conflict and ethics. Its idea that a large, complex city could govern itself through open participation echoed far beyond Greece. Even as flaws grew, the experiment was extraordinary. Soon the dream would be tested to breaking. The long Peloponnesian War would drag Athens from glory to ruin. Democracy would survive, but scarred, and the memory of its rise, from clan feuds to empire of the people, would become a cautionary tale as well as an inspiration. The golden age of Athens did not end in peace. Its confidence, empire, and naval democracy set it on a collision course with Sparta and the Peloponnesian League. In 431 BCE, after years of rising tension, proxy wars, and shifting alliances, the Peloponnesian War began, a struggle that would last nearly 3 decades and exhaust the Greek world. At first, Athens seemed well prepared. Pericles, still guiding strategy, advised a defensive plan. Avoid land battles against Sparta's fearsome hoplites, rely on the long walls linking Athens to its port of Piraeus, and let the powerful navy raid enemy coasts and protect grain supply lines. Athens' empire could provide resources. Its fleet was unmatched. But Pericles died in a plague that swept the overcrowded city in 429 BCE, taking with him steady leadership and many citizens. The plague itself, worsened by refugees sheltering behind the walls, killed perhaps a quarter of the population, shaking morale and faith in the gods. With Pericles gone, Athenian politics turned turbulent. The direct democracy that had empowered citizens also meant rapid swings in policy. New leaders, often charismatic demagogues such as Cleon, pushed aggressive strategies and promised quick victories. Some generals pursued risky offensives to satisfy a restless assembly eager for glory and tribute. Athens still scored successes. Its navy dominated the Aegean, and allies supplied grain and funds. But Sparta adapted. With Persian gold, it built a fleet to challenge Athens at sea. Meanwhile, internal dissent in Athens' empire grew. Subjects resented tribute and garrisons. Rebellions flared and were put down brutally, as at Melos, where Athens killed or enslaved an entire population to deter defiance. Democracy at home became imperial autocracy abroad. The war's turning point came with the ambitious Sicilian expedition, 415–413 BCE. Persuaded by demagogues and the charismatic but erratic Alcibiades, the assembly voted to send a massive fleet and army to conquer distant Syracuse in Sicily. The goal was wealth and strategic advantage, the risk enormous. The campaign ended in disaster. Syracuse, aided by Sparta, trapped and annihilated the Athenian force. Tens of thousands were killed or enslaved. The navy, the foundation of Athenian power and poor citizens' pride, suffered catastrophic loss. This defeat shook Athens but did not immediately end the war. The city rebuilt fleets and fought on, a testament to its resilience and resources. Yet confidence fractured. Oligarchic conspirators used the crisis to stage a coup in 411 BCE, replacing democracy with the short-lived rule of the 400. Popular resistance soon restored a broader democracy, but the cycle revealed fragility. Fear and loss could push even a long-standing citizen regime toward elite control. Meanwhile, Sparta found a masterful admiral, Lysander, and steady Persian funding. In 405 BCE at Aegospotami, he trapped and destroyed the Athenian fleet. With no ships to bring grain from the Black Sea, Athens starved. In 404 BCE, the city surrendered. Its walls were torn down, its empire dissolved. Sparta installed an oligarchic regime, the notorious 30 tyrants, supported by a Spartan garrison. For a moment, it seemed the Athenian democratic experiment was over. The 30 ruled brutally, executing opponents and exiling many citizens. Yet the story did not end there. Democratic exiles rallied at Phyle and retook the city by 403 BCE. In an extraordinary act of reconciliation, the restored democracy offered amnesty to most collaborators, seeking to heal rather than perpetuate civil war. The system, battered but alive, resumed. Athens after the Peloponnesian War was humbler and poorer. It would never again dominate Greece as in Pericles' time. Yet democracy endured, remarkably, through defeat, tyranny, and economic strain. The institutions proved adaptable. Citizen juries, the assembly, and rotation of offices continued. Thinkers like Socrates and later Plato and Aristotle debated the system's flaws and strengths, leaving intellectual legacies even as the city's power waned. In the 4th century BCE, Athens experienced brief revivals and further experiments. Leaders like Demosthenes tried to rally resistance against new powers, particularly Macedon under Philip II and later Alexander the Great. But Athens could not match the centralized monarchies rising in the north. In 338 BCE, after defeat at Chaeronea, the city lost real independence, becoming part of a Macedonian-dominated Greece. Its democracy survived in form but under the shadow of kings. Still, the Athenian experiment had already changed history. It proved that a large, complex city could govern itself without kings or entrenched aristocracy. At least for a time. It showed how citizen armies and navies could defend freedom and how public debate could shape grand strategy. It also revealed democracy's vulnerabilities, susceptibility to populism, risky foreign ventures, and the temptation to dominate others while preaching liberty. Culturally, the legacy was enormous. The tragedies and comedies of the 5th century continued to be performed and studied. Philosophers reflected on democracy's nature. Plato critiqued its volatility. Aristotle analyzed its mechanics, and later thinkers used Athens as a model or warning. The city's buildings, art, and civic ideals became symbols of classical achievement long after its empire faded. The idea of democracy itself, though limited to free males, planted a seed. Centuries later, Romans would borrow and adapt aspects of popular governance. Early modern Europe, rediscovering Greek texts, found in Athens both inspiration and caution. The belief that ordinary citizens could deliberate and rule, and the warning that mob passions and imperial overreach could undo freedom. Modern democracies echo Athenian practices: citizen juries, public debate, accountability of leaders, though on vastly different scales. Athens' decline also teaches that democracy is not static. It must adapt to wealth inequality, military pressure, and the lure of conquest. A system born from compromise and reform can erode when power becomes overconfident or concentrated. Yet it can also recover. The Athenians restored their democracy after war, plague, defeat, and tyranny. That resilience may be its most remarkable legacy. Looking back, the rise of Athens was neither smooth nor purely idealistic. It began with harsh laws written in blood, debt slavery, and opportunistic aristocrats. It was pushed forward by poets, reformers, and even tyrants. It faced annihilation from the Persian Empire and survived. It soared to cultural brilliance and imperial power, only to fall to hubris and rival states. And yet, through all this, the core idea that citizens could govern themselves refused to die. When we speak today of democracy's origins, it is tempting to imagine a straight line from philosophy to practice. The truth is messier and more human. Athens built its system step by step, often under duress, balancing old privilege with new demands, learning through victory and catastrophe. Its story reminds us that self-government is not granted. It is struggled for, defended, and constantly reimagined. From a poor hillside settlement of farmers and herders to a naval empire that lit the Mediterranean with art and debate, Athens' journey is one of ambition, resilience, and warning. Its democracy was narrow by our standards and often betrayed its own ideals. But it was the first great attempt, and for all its flaws, it changed how humans think about power. The city's long arc, from Draco's bloody code to Solon's compromise, from Cleisthenes' audacity to Pericles' splendor, from imperial overreach to hard-won survival, remains one of history's most compelling stories. It shows how ordinary people, given voice and agency, can create greatness and how fragile that greatness can be. The walls fell, the empire crumbled, and kings rose again. Yet the memory of Athens endured, whispering across millennia. That freedom, though imperfect and precarious, can be built by human hands, and must be defended by them, again and again.